Hi, welcome to the show. Today, I am very honored to have with me an individual that brings a lot of passion, a lot of commitment, and a lot of intelligence to this table. She's an author and a local mediator, and I'm proud to have with me Kathy Beckwith.
Thank you, Ken. I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you so much. Well, we have in front of us this poster, A Mighty Case Against War, the title of the book that you published recently. And what's the tagline there? Can you zoom in on that, Angela?
Yeah, the subtitle is What America Missed in U.S. History Class and What We All Can Do Now.
A challenge to question and to change the world. Okay,
Let's do it.
That's a good title. There's a lot there. Well, now you brought frogs too.
I did.
So let's talk about that. How do frogs fit into war?
Well, if you're going to talk about history and how history impacts where we are now and where we're headed for the future, you first of all have to realize that there are questions surrounding you. And I brought the frogs because there is a story, and there's some scientific disagreement on the size of the pot and the temperature of the water and things like this. But there is an old story about a great green frog who is outside the cabin and sees the kitchen door is ajar and hops on into the kitchen, up onto the wood stove that's cold there for the night, and then on into the lima bean pot where the lima beans are soaking for the next day's lunch. And this frog hops right into the water, the nice cool water, and as frogs are known to do, being the cold-blooded animals that they are, adapts to the temperature of the water. And in the morning, and along with this great green is a little blue frog that comes along and hops into, but stays in the wood pile next to the stove. In the morning, when the master of the house awakens and she starts to cook the beans for the soup, or starts the fire in there, the water starts to heat. And the frog comfortably stays right where it is. Blue wakes up and hops in too and says, "Holy cow, what are you doing? You're in hot water, exceedingly hot water. You've got to get out of here or you're cooked." And the frog just coolly said, What? What hot water? What are you talking about? And the story can end however we choose. It can be lima beans cooked, or it can be the frog paying attention to the voice of caution and asking, could there be something wrong? My conjecture is the more I have worked on this book and the more I've talked to people about it afterwards, we are all, or most of us, are green frogs. We're in the lima bean pot that we were born into, and we take for granted the normalcy of war as a means of solving international problems. So we have to be startled, I think, to say that we'll question. Otherwise, we just continue on thinking, unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
Now, reading your book, you do take a startling path, and you have researched extensively many of the conflicts the United States has been in with other countries. And you make a case against each one of them. So that's something new that you've brought out.
And I didn't start out making a case. The title of this book was not one I had even considered.
Okay.
It came at near the end of this project when I realized war after war, these patterns were repeating. It became, an editor asked me at one point, well, what's it about? And I said, actually, it's a mighty case against war. That's what it's become. And he said, well, I think that's your book title then. But it is startling because when you begin to see the reasons that we entered into war, what was happening, you see, it is not what most Americans believe of their country.
Can we take a few examples of, let's just hold World War II for a moment, and we'll get to that one. But let's talk about a few of the earlier wars that you talk about and how they were the result of steps that maybe didn't need to be taken.
Well, as far as startling things to me, I mean, I am a part of what America missed in U.S. history class. I just admit that right away. I was a good student. I studied hard. I enjoyed history, but for some reason, and I don't know if it wasn't taught or the details just didn't hold, even the American Revolution was a shock to me as I began into it. Yes, there were sides to the story, and that's one thing that I've done in this book, the perspective from one side and the perspective from the other side. That having been given, then I go into the background of the situation. But as far as alternatives in the American Revolutionary War, it was astounding what the colonists had done. They were amazing networkers. They were extremely courageous. They had determined that laws that were unjust were not going to be followed. And they, when they were required to buy a stamp and have it affixed to every document to make that a legal document, they just simply said, no, we won't do it. And that took courage, because if things didn't come out right, were they really going to have a deed to their land or not? When they were dismissed, you cannot meet as a legislature. They moved next door and moved out of the building and met elsewhere. Communication wasn't what we have today, and still they kept in touch with each other. When tea was taxed, they used herbal, things that they could grow locally. When they wanted to boycott the English fabrics being brought in to make an impact, they learned to weave. I mean, it sounds like India and their independence, but maybe Gandhi learned this from American colonists. I don't know. And they did things that were patriotic to the point that merchants on the other side of the ocean said, we cannot survive. What are you doing with this colony? You're ruining our business. And these laws started being unwound. Yeah. Until it got to the point where people said, oh no, it's not moving fast enough. This isn't happening the way we want it. And I think because we were so geared to respond with violence, it happened again.
So your point is that if people had been more patient, that this separating, this unwinding, this disconnection could have taken a peaceful path.
Absolutely. And the War of 1812, I mean, you asked for other examples
Yes.
too. That was a very specific example. They had legitimate concerns that, again, had two sides to the story. The U.S. was saying, you're stopping our merchant ships, you're taking our, sailors off those and impressing them into the British Army, British Navy. And the British were responding, yes, but isn't it interesting how our British sailors who have defected suddenly become American citizens and, show their birth certificates having been rocked in the arms of their grannies and, whatever, that are absolutely false. But so anyway, there was a conflict, and that was brought to, it was brought to the attention of Parliament. That was, like you said, unwound. It was undone. But by the time news got back to the colonies, war had started.
Oh my.
Instead of declaring, we won. They've done exactly what we've asked. War was on. Hey, if we do things right here, we can take some more territory. I mean, Canada is still, open. Let's see what else we can get here. So we stayed in war for 2 more years.
So, Kathy, we don't have time to go through every war, but you did in this book. And so I just want to say that as to entice people to go down to Third Street Books and buy it, because you dismantle, that might be a word for it, the cause, the need for every one of the United States conflicts, Spanish-American War, on down the list. So that is some very interesting reading.
It's fascinating, and I too would invite people into that history.
Let's go to World War II. That's the big, well, wait a minute. What about Hitler? Okay, what do you say?
That is the question I think I was asked most when people knew I was working on this book, and even after it's been out, I think that's the question that comes to me. Because people say we have to have a strong military today because another Hitler could come. And, that's the justification for the level of military spending and everything that we have, although that's so out of whack from what it was, even in World War II days. The thing is, that is another time that we must delve into history. Do people really understand what happened at the end of World War I? How Germany was declared the sole guilty party, that they would have reparations to make. The Treaty of Versailles is considered by I'm sure by most historians, to be laying the basis for World War II. When people felt that they were so poorly mistreated, they had to fight back. When we were talking about international disarmament, it began to be applied only to Germany. And so even, American arms suppliers that wanted the business started selling weapons that were supposed to be banned. The right for people in colonies to have their own independence, decide their independence, happened to only apply to German colonies. And the others, the ones who won the war, no, they left the status quo as it was. So people were ready for someone who would say, we are a people who will be strong again and who will take care of our own needs, and I will lead you there. And Hitler was voted in, appointed into office. It wasn't, there's an amazing history that I think it's much more important than to say, what about Hitler, that we finish the sentence and say, what about Hitler must we never forget and never allow to happen here today? And there are obvious, easy answers. Well,
so there's a lot to learn here in that chapter that we don't know, that we need to know so that we don't repeat those mistakes. What's that famous phrase? If you're ignorant of history, you're doomed to repeat it. So again, a good reason to see what you've amassed here, what you've done with the endless research. And you have how many footnotes? How many endnotes?
400 and some. Yeah, in fact, the book, it's a 300-page book, but 250 pages, is the text of the book, and the rest is endnotes. I just decided there are so many things, Ken, that I think people would say, you're kidding. Is this really, where'd she get this information? So that I decided very soon I was going to footnote this, endnote this very accurately, so people can go back and check and see for themselves what this says.
Exhaustively. Everything you say that needs to be backed up is.
Thanks. Yeah.
You've got a chapter, section in the book about the myths of war. Tell us about what you put together there. Well,
it became things that I realized have to be challenged, because it's like this green frog. We don't question what we assume is. And one of them that I think throws us into apathy is things will never change. And partway through, and I remember having heard of this before, but it was just brought to me. Andrew Jackson was upset about his wife Rachel being slandered by someone spreading a rumor about him. So he challenged that man to a duel. shot and killed him, because that was a gentlemanly way of defending the honor of your spouse.
Yeah.
And I had read some of the older, commentaries on dueling that said dueling will always be required for the honor of men, as war will always be required for the honor of nations. I thought, okay, there is no way that people would say dueling is honorable. I mean, if anything, it's ridiculous and cruel and counterproductive and absolutely stupid. And so if war is going to be in the same category of things that will never change as dueling, or for that matter, slavery, or the fact that women should have a vote, anyway, we know things change. But sometimes I think we don't look at, well, could that mean that we as nations could actually build the conditions under which international conflict could be resolved without this barbaric, costly, destructive, wasteful, counterproductive thing we call war? Yes.
Can you think of another myth that you talk about?
Oh.
How about when you said that war is not going to change? And then there's another myth, probably what you talk about as a myth is it's inevitable. Sometimes there's no alternative. What about that?
Well, that simply came by the excitement that there were all kinds of alternatives that were shown. First, finishing that section on the history and seeing that every single major war had alternatives. That, I think, blew that myth away. Some of the, and then I took a whole chapter just to talk about alternatives to difficult, challenging international issues, and showed how they were resolved. And challenged us, I think, to look at the United Nations in a new light. When I was doing research for the Gulf War, 91, and learned what we had done to buy the votes of the United Nations Security Council to do what we wanted, I thought, you are kidding. Is this not the place where wisdom from around the world can come together and be shared and look at alternatives? And instead, we have the arrogance to say, we want this, you will do this, and these are the conditions that we will make it lucrative or interesting for you to go with what we want. So even the myth of the United Nations, that it is an improper functioning thing, well, that's probably not a myth now, but we are part of the creators of that problem, and we could make that an organization that could do amazing things in resolving conflict. We have so many academic programs in international conflict resolution now that if we would only tap into those, we have a U.S. Institute of Peace who's it's sponsored by the U.S. government. Its task is to learn those things. We have a State Department, and when I found that we have 210 times more uniformed military personnel than we do State Department and USAID, our international aid agency, combined.
210 more times uniformed personnel
Than all of State Department Foreign Service and all of our development workers combined. I think, well, what are we expecting if we do not put funding and personnel into those places where people are, their task is to come up with things that, first of all, inform us of what's going on, and then to find the solutions. you know. So the myth that it's inevitable is, you know. Another myth is that America's the good guy, you know, and the good guy does no wrong. And when we go that far, I mean, if nothing else that this book does, I think it would ask us to walk humbly in light of our history and see where we can learn from others. Stop bragging that we need to be number one in the world. Look at ourselves as one nation among many in a world that needs our wisdom and needs our caring. There are so many amazing things. I had fun just thinking of McMinnville and Yamhill County and the amazing things that we have right here that are America is the good guy, you know. But when we add on and does no wrong, we've missed, you know, we've missed the mark so far.
Well, Kathy, we've been talking globally, internationally. Let's talk personally. What can we do? Where do we start as individuals here in this small corner of the world? What do you offer us?
Well, I would love to have everyone assigned a history lesson. You know, I think that is a beginning point to say we need to learn more. We have numbed ourselves. We have gone to sleep. We need to know what our country has done.
So you're offering this book.
So this book, or it doesn't have to be this book, any book that is honest, that looks at this from all perspectives, looks at the story of war, but then I say, yes, get back to U.S. history, see what we've done. And then with that knowledge, say, okay, what does this mean for me? I think personally, if we're going to speak for problem solving, we better learn how to be problem solvers. So, I mean, it may sound trite almost. After writing a book about international conflict, I come back to a suggestion that we all look at our source of information, that we look at how we communicate with others, that we learn a skill called bouncing back, listening to someone and saying in your own words what you've heard them say to make sure you understood right.
Reflective listening.
Right. Paraphrasing, reflective listening. And to do that begins to build within us a personal confidence. Yeah, I can get along in my family. I can get along in my organization. You know, I can get along at work because I am using some skills that are practical, that make a difference in how I understand others. And when we've done that, then I think we feel more hopeful that this could be done on another level. Because we really have split things apart. We say there's one basis for personal, family, community, even the state of Oregon actions. There's another level for international, and that doesn't apply. There we will use destruction, we'll use murder, we won't call it that, you know, but we have to find a way to be consistent and say, does what I do personally, could that apply internationally? And when we begin with ourselves, we begin to see, yeah, I think it could. But then I think we need to go beyond that because there's a really big momentum and machine out there that's already got some pretty good hype going. That war is reasonable, it's our only option, you know, we never use it except as a last resort. I think we need to stand against that. And I suggest that we find one thing to do to speak out against a war, because some people aren't ready to speak out against war, but a war, they can find the details and certainly can. And then do that in community with someone else. Here locally, we have Yamhill Valley Peacemakers, an organization that is being re-energized and reactivated. And other groups, I think the word is getting out to people to say, find the group that energizes you, that you can identify with, that you want to work with, and find the way to speak out.
Well, Kathy, we come from a similar generation. In the 60s, we had Vietnam right in our face. And as kids, we made choices, and a lot of us protested the war. And that's kind of we grew up with that. It's in our DNA. I don't see young people now with that sense that if they protest, it will make a difference, or even models of protesting and making their voice known, which may be different from what's happening in the wider world. What gives you hope?
Well, first of all, I have to give a disclaimer. I wasn't a typical child of the 60s. I was concerned about school and wedding plans, going off to India in the Peace Corps, having Wayne, my husband, get out of the draft. Vietnam wasn't a part of my life. So I may be a part of, had a background similar to many that would say, there are other things to be doing. I'm not concerned. What gives me hope? Well, one thing is I recently, in the end of February, Linfield, some of the students from Linfield did a program for the community and the college on their traveling to Standing Rock. And it was absolutely inspiring to me to see, they said, this will never be finished. We have been transformed. Our lives will never be the same for having been there and observed and been a part of something that stood for right. And they are young people on fire to make a difference. So if I can borrow some of their hope, and I'm encouraged. I also take great hope from the fact that I don't know anyone who says, I want to leave this world a mess for our kids and grandkids. I think everyone feels children deserve something better than what we have now. So we will find a way. And I personally sense that something natural in life is a longing for kindness. And when we can learn ways of doing that, we'll make a difference. One ripple continues out and changes in some way. I'm probably one that feels it's got to happen now. I've got to see the change. I've got to see the end. But I know we're also on a journey.
A journey that hopefully you and I can be part of, wrapping up these, unwinding these conflicts, bringing these conflicts to an end, instead of them finding more and more paths and more tentacles and more complications out into the world. Starting to reduce those would be something I would like to see between the time when I am gone and now and when I'm gone. And then my kids will have less of that to do instead of more. Well, thanks for inspiring me. Thanks for being here, and I hope people that have been watching today are inspired as well.
Thanks for giving me that opportunity to share what I do feel passionate about, Ken.
Thank you, Kathy.